In this tutorial, we're going to have an overview, a bird's eye look, if you like, of the What You See Is What You Get editor. Now, the editor itself has its own tab, but when you first start Web Content Studio, you'll notice that the tab isn't present. The reason it's not present is that there's nothing to edit. So to open the editor, you need to open or add a new article. So let me just add a new article and I can show you. I'm going to add a new article in here and I'm going to just call it demo. And then I'm going to double click. And when I double click, we now have the editor tab. So if you don't see the editor tab, it means you do not have an article open. But let me just backtrack again. And I've just reopened Web Content Studio to remove the editor. So I do not have an article open for editing. What you can do is you can go to the keyword spider and you can run the spider without opening the editor. However, once you've got your results, let's say you wanted to then create the report, you'll see that this button, Add Phrases to Article Theme List, is grayed out. The reason it's grayed out should be fairly obvious, and it's because there's no article to add them to. If you've done your keyword research and you've got your keywords there, you haven't lost them if you forgot to open an article, because you can just go back to the file or to the Home tab, click on Open New Article, open or add a new article, depending what you want to do. Go back to the keywords tab and then you've got the option of adding them in, and there we go, we've got the keywords added in there. So just remember, if there's no editor tab, then it's because you haven't got an article open for editing. And if you're on the keyword spider and this button is grayed out, it means you don't have an article open. So just go over and open one and then that tab will appear. Then you can import the keywords into the article. So this is the What You See Is What You Get editor screen. We're going to go over each of the various elements in a bit more detail, but I want to give you an overview now so you just know where everything is. This What You See Is What You Get tab is where you write your content. And let's put a heading in here. Okay, and then press return. And when we press return, you see the editing box has moved. It moved from here down one level, and the reason you've got an editing box is that this editing box is there to remind you about the elements you're putting on the page. So I've got omega-3 fatty acids. I want to make that into an H1 header, so I can make it into a H1 header, but if I continue typing within that same editing box, it's still an H1 header. So to create a new paragraph, hit return, and you can see that the heading is no longer inside the editing box because we created a new editing box. Every time you press return, if we look at the source code, you'll see, in fact, it's all flowing in there, but when we hit return, we've actually created paragraph tags for the next paragraph of the article. So we've got that box. I can keep pressing return to create new paragraphs, and you'll see that they're being created in the source code for the HTML. And I can similarly delete them. Let me just type something in. Okay, so we've got a couple of paragraphs and I want to go through a couple of the features in this toolbar. At the top, you've got the usual formatting. So you've got bold, italics, superscript, subscript, and so on. And you can make changes just by selecting the text and clicking on the buttons. So that's now made that bold. And you've got access to bullet points and numbered lists and indenting of your paragraphs. And then we've got some features here which we'll look at again later in later tutorials, but essentially inserting links, inserting images, inserting symbols. This allows you to use something called writing guides, a way of getting your content out of Web Content Studio. Also, we can open up the scratch pad. And a very useful feature over here is the tree view, but again, we're going to look at that later. What I want to look at briefly here is the font selection, because what you can do is you can select text and you can select a font. Let's say Ventura Black, and then the font changes. I would suggest that you use this feature very, very sparingly. The reason is that, let me just select another one. In fact, let's choose something a little bit fancier. All right. The reason is that when you use this to change text, you end up getting a lot of inline CSS in your file, and it makes your file bloated, and when you import it into your web page, you've then got this mess of inline CSS, when in fact the CSS, the styling of your pages should be controlled, or are better controlled using a single CSS file or files that are called externally. So I would avoid using formatting like this. The one time I would use it is if I had, let's say I was writing an article about programming and I wanted to include some code and have that code, let's say I would normally pick Courier for that. So let's just go down, Courier new, and then I have specific code for that one paragraph. So if you're going to use fonts and font sizes, do it very, very sparingly. You've also got the option here of colors, so you can change text to various colors. And one thing that is perhaps more useful is highlighting the background behind text, so you can highlight things there. We also have an option here to add in a few other bits of HTML, which we're not going to go into here. And we've got an option of stripping HTML. If you've copied web content from a web page, then Web Content Studio won't like it. One of the ways you can get it into Web Content Studio is plain text, and this feature, which we'll look at later, shows you how to do that. Over on the right hand side, we've got theme words, and we've got theme phrases, and we've also got the reports, but we're going to look at those in more detail in future tutorials. But for now, that's an overview of the What You See Is What You Get editor.